Hello and welcome to Caucasian Journal video interviews. Our guests today are KHIDASHELI, leader of Civic Idea non-governmental organization and former Defense Minister of Georgia, and Kristin Krohn DEVOLD, former Defense Minister of Norway and currently head of Norwegian Travel Association, who joins us online. Dear Tina, first, thank you very much for giving this interview. Tina, you have many hats. You are an experienced politician, a legal expert, a head of a leading Georgian non-governmental organization, and of course, former defense minister. The first and actually the only one female defense minister in this country. Talking about your ministerial term, one cannot avoid two themes: abolishing the compulsory military service and Georgia's NATO aspiration. If there are any other themes you want to cover, you are more than welcome. But since we have international talk today, I suggest to start with the NATO theme.
Sure. Well, thank you first of all, and it's a pleasure to be part of this discussion. In Georgia, for the last, I would say, almost 20 years, Ministry of Defense worked heavily in a very close cooperation with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and somehow assumed the portion of the role of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs as well, because of, particularly because of the NATO activities in Georgia, but also because of our participation in European Union security operations as well. Ministry of Defense always was the core component of the Georgia's international policy or Georgia's foreign policy, defining it, working on it, structuring it, and actually contributing a lot for the success of our foreign policy goals. All it started obviously in Prague during the NATO's Prague summit, when then President Eduard Shevardnadze has knocked on NATO doors, declared Georgia's aspiration of joining NATO, and now, after almost 20 years from that day, we are still aspiring to achieve that goal. 2008 was a very important cornerstone in Georgia-NATO relations, when in Bucharest during the summit, NATO took a decision about unavoidability of Georgia's actual membership to NATO together with Ukraine, and for the first time in NATO's history we've got a declaration which clearly states that eventually one day Georgia and Ukraine will become members of NATO. So again, it's been 12 years ago, we are still in this under this promise, but unfortunately there is no clear perspective as to when it is going to happen. In 2014, 15, 16, we've been experiencing very important developments in Georgia-NATO relations. During the Welsh summit, we've got a package that we call an alternative to MAP, that is the main impediment to our membership to NATO. Absence of MAP is the main impediment. The NATO-Georgia substantial package that was awarded to Georgia during the Welsh summit identified the fields and areas where NATO, concrete NATO member states would have contributed for the success of the reforms, success of the institution building, and success of the eventual membership of Georgia. The project actually started in 2015, exactly at the time when I became the minister, and we should say that the country which contributed the most filled its promises basically entirely, and we've celebrated the first success of Georgia-NATO actual real-life cooperation was in Norway, when in August 2015 we have opened the doors of JTEC, the Joint NATO-Georgia Training Center, which is considered to be the one platform, and unfortunately still the only platform where NATO and Georgia's paths cross on the ground in this country. After that, obviously, lots of other developments have happened. We've opened also the NATO Defense School, which is another cornerstone of our cooperation. But JTEC still stands as the most vivid example of the success on this path of integration. I would say that because of different reasons, partly because almost 2,000 of Georgian soldiers participated in NATO-led operations all over the world, being it in Iraq or Afghanistan, or EU-led operations on the African continent, being it in Mali or Central African Republic, before that in Kosovo, Ukraine. Georgian troops and servicemen have gained absolutely unique experience and had unique opportunities of both introduction to the modern armament, modern facilities used by the NATO troops, as well as the actual life training in war situations and managing man-created or nature-created disasters during those periods. On the one hand, we have that huge asset, which is very valuable for the Georgian statehood as such, and security and defense of this country. And on the other hand, we have a strong political standing on basically all agendas introduced both by NATO as an organization and member countries on bilateral basis. Georgia was part of most of the initiatives, or I would say all of the initiatives in fighting terrorism, fighting all kinds of evils, threatening democracy and civilization as we know it in this world. So I would say that the main impediment on our way to integration is rather practical and very much political, and has nothing to do with either interoperability of the Georgian armed forces, that is normally the main requirement on the NATO side, or political reforms to be implemented within the army or in civilian military relations of the on the defense side of the country. But it is our big neighbor, Russia, which is kind of an elephant in the room that everybody understands, everybody knows about, nobody talks about during the NATO summits. They are not there. Obviously, they do not participate, but at the same time are the ones who are influencing decisions regarding not only Georgia, but also Ukraine. They've tried to influence the decisions regarding the Balkan states, the North Macedonia, Montenegro. We remember all the developments right before the membership path was cleared and invitation decisions were made. But we stay believers. We strongly believe that one day that road will clear for us as well. And I always joke that when the stars align properly on the sky for Georgia, that's the moment when we need to be ready to jump in and not to miss the opportunity again, as we did during this big enlargement, 2 waves of big enlargements of NATO at the end of 90s and 2000s, beginning of 2000s.
Let me introduce Kristin Krohn DEVOLD, former Defense Minister of Norway, who joins our talk from Oslo. Like her Georgian colleague, she was a Minister of Defense, and she was a Member of Parliament, and she also works currently in the non-governmental sector, being the head of the Norwegian Travel Association. Dear Kristin, greetings from Tbilisi, Georgia, and thank you for taking part in our interview.
Dear Mr. Alexander Kafka, it's a great honor to be interviewed by you together with Tina from Georgia. And it's so nice to know that we are more and more females that actually have been ministers of defense, an important position in the world.
So you have now virtually met with your Georgian colleague, Tina HIDASHELI. It would be interesting to hear your comments. Perhaps you would wish to comment on the aspects of your ministerial term, or more generally on the modern security challenges, as well as Norway's cooperation with NATO.
I'd like to start telling about NATO and the role it's had for Norway. Norway was occupied of Germany during Second World War. And that made Norway very, very dedicated to never let that happen again and to try to get into defense cooperation as soon as the possibility opened up. So when NATO was founded, Norway was with from the start. It's been a guarantee for Norwegian security through all these years. And of course, the country that we are neighbor with, Russia, has always been the threat that we worried most about. I had a special period as a Minister of Defense. It was from 2001 to 2005. And we had the election day, 10th of September 2001. And we all know what happened September 11. So the day after the election, Norway, together with the rest of NATO, was in a position that we would have to enter a war towards Afghanistan and Taliban and Al-Qaeda. And I was appointed Minister of Defense at that time. So it was an interesting time. Little Norway up here in the mountains, far away for everything. We had to engage in both Afghanistan. We were already in Kosovo. And during my period, we also got the second war towards Iraq, which we participated with engineers and rebuilding capacity. So during my period, we were engaged in many places over the world. And it was also a period when we really had to test whether our capacities in the defense were relevant. And a lot of them were not relevant anymore. So we had to modernize quite a lot. And the most important experience we made was that if Norwegian equipment couldn't be integrated with foreign forces equipment, it couldn't be used because we had to do everything together with others. So this was a major transition from thinking what would be good to have back in Norway, inside our own borders, and what kind of equipment would we need to operate integrated with others globally. When that is said, I'd like also to say that today's threats are a little bit different. I think that cyber threats is increasingly dangerous to us all. And we also see that threats with fake operations through social media to actually influence elections is also another threat that we really have to pay attention to. So there are many ways for foreign forces to influence our countries, also take control of our countries without using a single soldier. So both cybersecurity and this social media fake campaigns, when they are used massively, and I also think we all know that they try to influence, for instance, the American election when Trump was elected. This is also things we have to pay a lot of attention to, together with the more traditional threats.
Given our sort of Nordic dimension of our talk, and we shall further also involve Finnish and Swedish participants in this talk in the future, who have different models of cooperation with NATO. Like, for instance, Sweden and Finland are closely cooperating with NATO without being formal members. Do you think perhaps that would be one of more realistic goals for Georgia to consider in the future?
Well, we are actually, if we talk format-wise, we are in the same format as Sweden, Finland, Australia, countries much more developed, obviously, both in terms of democracy and in terms of capacities than Georgia is. We are part of this group of states outside the NATO called EOP partners. And it was always very pleasant when I was a minister and I would attend various ministerials, being in Brussels or other capitals, sitting around the table with those guys, with the Swedes, Finns, Australians, because that's kind of a neighborhood that we had in cooperation with NATO. At the same time, obviously, we understand that regardless of the status, these cooperations are very different on different levels and on different political standing. Obviously, I was always asking this question that whenever we were told that without MEP, Georgia has no chance of becoming the NATO member, we were always asking, are you going to ask for the MEP requirements from Sweden if one day there will be referenda and Sweden decides to become member of NATO? And obviously it's not going to happen. If Swedes decide, they will be in. So we were basically always asking for the similar treatment for many reasons, and for but most importantly for the reason that the Georgian military, by their own evaluation, by all papers, all documents, anything you read written and released by the NATO military or civilian HQs, evaluates them on the highest terms, absolutely along any NATO member or European member country. But yeah, unfortunately, we understand that it's not happening and it's not the same. Simultaneously, we do need to consider those experiences and find our own path and our own way. What I cannot see is this kind of status neutral that some of those European countries are enjoying, because this is something completely unacceptable for Georgia on the one hand, and on the other hand, in terms of being neutral country, you need an approval from the neighbors, which we are never going to get, obviously. But other than that, yes, we've been working very closely. They've been working very closely within the frameworks of the Welsh Summit delivered Georgia NATO cooperation package, and both Swedes and Finns are participating in various dimensions of it, being it JTEC that I've already mentioned, led by Norwegians, as well as a defense building school and several other cybersecurity, for example, not the Nordics, but the Baltic countries are in lead. Estonians, Czechs actually are contributing very heavily also. But yeah, eventually the decision of the Georgian people is the membership, different from the populations in either Finland or Sweden. And this is probably the biggest difference between the two that differentiates us from those countries. We aspire for membership as soon as possible, as sooner the better. They took a different path, and they can allow themselves a different path.
While Norway is a full NATO member, it would be interesting to hear your views about advantages and disadvantages of various NATO cooperation models, especially in connection with involving new countries, such as Georgia.
I'd also like to answer your question about why we are a full member of NATO in Norway, while Sweden and Finland has chosen different kind of cooperation. I think this also has to do with historic experiences. During Second World War, Finland experienced a war between Germany and Russia in their own territory. And they have a closeness to Russia that made them very careful not to provoke Russia after the Second World War. Sweden were neutral during Second World War, and Norway was occupied by Germany more or less all the time. So the Norwegian experience was that we would absolutely not like to be neutral, because we saw that German soldiers could use Sweden as their gateway into Norway, and we saw that neutrality wasn't worth that much when the stronger part really wanted to use your territory, your trains, etc. So Norway said we do not want to be neutral. We've learned from Second World War that we need to group with our closest friends, closest allies, and we need to do this as a full member of NATO. Sweden like to continue their neutrality. That's why they're not a full member. While Finland might have even more their historic experiences is that they maybe had to be a little bit more cautious towards Russia, that than we felt it was natural for us to be. So, but at the same time, when we were in Afghanistan with Norwegian soldiers in my period, we had a close cooperation with both Swedish and Finnish forces. They were there together with us in the ISAF. And we also had a good cooperation with other European friends that were not full members of NATO. And I think there are many ways to choose the cooperation. And this is something each country may have to decide for themselves. And maybe a lot of countries also would like to start as cooperative countries, but maybe then in a later phase enter in as a full member. I cannot give you advice, just say that the 3 Nordic countries has chosen totally different ways of being a member, and Denmark has chosen the same experience as Norway. They were also fully occupied from Germany during Second World War, and that's why they took the same position as Norway after the Second World War.
Well, compulsory military service. You were severely criticized for abolishing it during your term, but time and again we hear about its high costs, inefficiency, and even corruption and nepotism in this field. So why do you think it is still in place?
It is not. It's a very legalistic issue, to put it this way. I did not abolish military service. I did not have power for that. It's up to the parliament because it is regulated by the legislation. What I did was I found a loophole for showing the path and showing the way how to deal with this very serious problem for the Georgian society. I have cancelled request by the Ministry of Defense on bringing the young people under the auspices of the compulsory military service. So we basically denied our quota and said that we don't need it. We moved to the fully professional army, which is actually the case. When I was a minister, the recruits were only 2% of the entire army, which proves the case. I mean, I don't think I need any additional arguments to say that it's a history for the Georgian military. But they needed recruits in army in order to put it under the source of the army, because otherwise big majority of them are used for completely different purposes than the military service in Georgia. They would be assigned to the Ministry of Interior, to the police force, and most importantly to the correction services, which is basically guarding the prisons. This is one of the major problems for the 18, 19-year-old guys who've never been in touch with or who've never had any experience with the guns or with any kind of security action, and suddenly they found themselves standing on those high castles of the prison cells, over the prison cells, monitoring prisoners. That gives lots of trouble to them, and definitely they are not prepared for that. Anyways, the idea was twofold. First of all, not to allow anything that equals to slavery in Georgia, and this is my understanding of the type of compulsory military service Georgia exercises today. It is a modern day slavery. And two was to propose to a country an alternative to the needs, actual needs of the military, and employment or occupation of the use for the defense of the country. That is the constitutional requirement in Georgia. Currently, regardless of all the criticism of my policies and the document that I've published at that time about the about putting together needs and needs of the military and constitutional requirement, 2018, after the constitutional changes, we can easily say that compulsory military service was abolished, because now the Constitution does not say anymore that it is compulsory. It says that it should be regulated by law, which means that any parliament, depending on what kind of political forces enter the parliament with a majority, can change that decision. So it can be either today compulsory, tomorrow non-compulsory again, and then go back and forth, which is kind of an irresponsible decision also, but they did not have the courage of putting the actual wording of abolishing it in a constitution. So they went this midway of manipulation. I think that, well, first of all, lots of problems are related to this issue. First of all, it's the issue with equality. For example, the Constitution was saying that everybody was required to defend its own country, or whatever the wording was, similar to this one. But this everybody was only men and not the women. We had the problem with the selectivity of the process, because every year you have 28,000, almost around, from 21 to 28,000, depending on the year, kids graduating from the high schools, which means every year we have from 21 to 28,000 conscripts, but in reality the need was never over 5,000–6,000. It created an artificial process of selection which left lots of room for the nepotism, for the corruption, for the selectivity of the process, lots of discussion about the capital city and the regions, so less guys taken to this compulsory service from the cities and more from the regions, rural areas, remote areas, issues with the minorities, lots of problems associated with it. It was not worth the benefit from the compulsory military service was not worth of this this kind of a culture, social culture that it was introducing to the country. Costs, it's more expensive, it's inefficient, it's a burden for the professional army. Lots of the logistical issues associated to it. But at the same time, it is absolutely understandable, because coming with the background that Georgia has with the totalitarian communist past, just like around the corner, not 100, 200 years ago, but a couple of decades ago, the compulsory military service was always understood as a method of pressure on the society. In 2016, I remember that in a district that I was running for the parliamentary seat, and it was the same in 2012, there would be like huge numbers, 2,000, 4,000 kids and their families would get the letters from the conscription services saying that you are due for a military service, and then a week right before the elections they would get another letter from the ruling party, whomever was a ruling party at that time, saying that, oh, you're majoritarian, on behalf of your majoritarian candidate's recommendation, we have exempted you from the military service. And then families were happy and grateful for this kind gesture from their candidate, and inclined to vote for the guy who did such a great gesture for them. So lots of problems associated with it, and again, I don't believe that there is any reasonable justification for keeping it in terms of actual benefit that it brings to the country.
I see. You have just mentioned the gender issue. So we are approaching this major theme. You have become the first female defense minister, which is a huge achievement. But my question is, how important is it for you personally? I mean, do you consider your higher achievement to become a defense minister, or to become the first female defense minister?
Well, none of those. I don't consider that particular moment of my public life as the most important part of my public life. There were much more important things that I've done in my life, probably. But one thing is obviously to be mentioned, that man or woman, doesn't matter, serving the best part of your society, serving militaries, is the most honorable job one can have. Because every day you wake up and you realize that a couple of thousands of your guys are right now waiting for actual death because they are on the front lines of the war. There is nothing more honorable than being in service for those people, their families, being in support of their kids, and serving your country. I think this is what makes the position of a Minister of Defense so important and so great, and not the fact that whether you are a woman or man. I think it's equally honorable for anybody. In my case, unfortunately, I cannot say that it has dramatically changed any culture or attitudes towards this issue because I became the Minister of Defense being a woman, because I was human rights lawyer in my first life for 15 years, defending the most problematic of all, the prisoners tortured, the detainees abused at the police departments, the journalists abused by the police, actually fighting police in the courtrooms or in front of the cameras, because there were lots of instances when they would deny me as a lawyer entrance to my client, and then they would physically fight me not to enter the building. Sort of created this image of me, of a human being, regardless of a gender, who was on the front lines of a fight. And when I became the Minister of Defense, I don't remember anybody being particularly surprised, because for them I was this warrior, not necessarily a woman or whatever, but they were used to the fact that I was always on the front lines. So someone with less fight and more like women-associated professions probably would have made much bigger difference if becoming the Minister of Defense. But then whatever is the precondition of that, obviously, I think that it's kind of a duty of all women in charge of whatever, whether they run businesses or big businesses or NGOs or media or they are in government, is to empower other women, to give opportunities, to use this chance together with other things that you need to do in your position, to also use this chance to prove the case, to prove that equality is real and it works and it's practical, it's normal, and there is nothing special about it if women are in charge. And we've tried our best actually to bring that culture and that attitude in at the ministry. For the first time when I was a minister, we have created an opportunity for girls to go into the military lyceums, which was not the case before. We had only this opportunity available for boys. It's a full state-funded, wonderful school. We are together with the great education. Kids are also getting different from the ordinary public schools, sports and physical training, and getting used to overcoming the challenges and obstacles in life that normally in ordinary schools you don't get. We have been promoting, we've been naming things after the famous Georgian women from the First Republic, who've just to prove the fact that it's not for the first time, and those things were happening. There were women fighting for this country and sacrificing their lives that everybody forgot, and only men and their names were always out there. So that was another part of our campaign, to introduce those women to the Georgian public and to prove the case that it was a part of our history, not something brought by the UN declarations or European conventions, but it was part of our culture and our social life over the centuries. And also we've been helping women outside the army as well. For example, we had this social project that, usually over the Christmas or Independence Day or Easter, it's kind of normal. I don't know how it's in other countries. I guess it is the same in most of the countries, that the different agencies give out the gifts, and you do kind of packages for your employees or for the others, your colleagues, to say Happy New Year or Merry Christmas and bring some pleasure. And what we were doing was that instead of buying some goods produced in China and distributing them, we were contracting the social enterprises run by women, and by that sort of bringing our small support to them to develop even more and to do more and to also feel important and useful in this society. Government can do a lot. The state public funding gives an opportunity if you have a proper strategic goals and strategic plans to empower people, to empower society, to make them feel important and useful. And once people have that feeling, then it's mutual. Then it works the other way around as well. And this is how healthy society works, in constant cooperation between the governmental and non-governmental actors, and in constant support of each other and constant promotion of each other's achievements and work. Unfortunately, that's a very unusual culture in Georgia and needs to be developed and needs to be promoted. But we've tried our best to bring it. Unfortunately, all of our decisions were reverted after we left the ministry. I still don't understand why, but I'm pretty sure that those things won't be lost. For example, it's not necessarily about the gender, but we had a very strong policy of all Georgia, kind of civic Georgia nation policy, which meant that no differentiation by religion or by ethnic backgrounds of the people here. When I became the Minister of Defense, we had there was no percentage of Muslims, for example, because the number was so small that you cannot put it in percentage. It was like 0 point something, while you have almost 12% of Muslim community in Georgia, being it Azeri Muslims or Georgian Muslims, or the ones living in Pankisi Gorge. And we started a very special targeting Muslim communities in Georgia policy of bringing them to army and integrating them into the army. I remember when I was personally involved in this campaign. I went to Pankisi myself, talked to all kinds of groups there, all the people there of different levels of religious beliefs, and I remember that the request they had, very simple, very very typical, easy to know by yourself without even talking to those communities, because they have a different way of fasting, for example. And yes, they were saying that during those times they need a special meal plans at the military units where they would serve. They have a special attitude towards wearing beard, and again they had requests on that, or different kinds of hygiene related or prayer related issues that are very much well known. These are not like discovers why I did not know Muslims were doing it. Of course, we all know Muslims are doing it, and they were very skeptical. They were like, okay, here is the list of 5 issues that we need in order to even consider going into army, and we know it's not going to happen. So why to bother, and why are you even coming here? And I told them, I'm coming here next Monday with all of those decisions made, and then let's talk. And they were laughing, and then they left. And the next Monday I came with a changed law and changed the regulations of the Georgian army, being it catering or whatever was necessary. They could not believe it. And on the very first call to the professional army, which we do 3 times, now I don't know, but during my times we were doing 3 times a year, we've got 57, only from Pankisi Gorge, 57 Muslim Georgians who've joined the army. And that was like a huge number of all-time record ever after the independence of Georgia we had in the Georgian army. And it took like a very small steps for confidence building, nothing major, nothing huge. We've just devoted 1 room in each military base for the prayer to all. So it was not just the Orthodox Christians' prayer room, but like in the airports, you have everywhere those prayer rooms, something similar to that. And we changed the menus. I mean, it's like a joke. When I talk about it, I cannot even believe that it can be said as an achievement. But unfortunately, in a country like Georgia, those are exactly, those small things are exactly where this societal understanding of differences are stuck, and you are kind of stuck with this problem that you might be even bullied about, that, oh wow, she brought carpets to the military army for the prayers of Muslims. Yeah, so what? If you are bullied by that, then that's not the place where you should be. Unfortunately, again, those decisions were changed after we left the ministry, but I'm 100% sure that it will come back, and it will be the case in Georgian army pretty soon, because those things cannot be ignored forever.
So those tendencies have been changed after you
Most of our decisions regarding gender equality, religious minorities, generally minorities, not just the religious minorities, but also Armenians. It was the same case with the Armenians in Georgia, very small participation. All of those decisions were changed or cancelled, will be a better word probably. Yeah, we'll see.
So those issues are kind of in an unresolved state now, and they need political attention.
Yeah, unfortunately, those small issues are require big political courage. It's like a joke, but yeah, that's the case. You need to be politically courageous to have a fasting menu for Muslims in the army. I cannot even believe it, but yeah, that's the case. No pork policy is a political decision.
Obviously.
Unbelievable.
Indeed, unbelievable. Nordic countries are well known internationally for very progressive approaches towards gender equality as well as minorities' rights. As we heard from Tina's speech, these issues are very important for Georgia as well. Speaking about Norway, are these problems completely resolved in the armed forces or in the society in general?
I'd also like to talk about the gender issues. I think that in a modern society where cyber attacks and social media, fake campaigns are an important threat, just like the military threat, it's more important than ever to have clever minds in all positions in society. And clever minds, they are equally shared between men and females, which means that you need the best brains in politics, in business, and in the defense sector. So we have a historic experience in Norway because we had a female prime minister in the 80s, Gro Harlem Brundtland. And she decided that almost half of her cabinet ministers should be females. That was quite exceptional in the 80s. This is a 40-year-old history now. We are in 2020, but all governments after that has actually continued to have at least 40% female ministers, which means that in Norway now we have 40 years of experience with quite equal positions between men and women in politics, and we had several female prime ministers. I also know that we have had several females. We have females among finance minister, foreign minister, defense minister, minister of justice, etc. So there is really no difference between men and women in politics. It's also developing like that in the business sector, even it takes a little bit more time there. And of course, a lot of the companies are privately owned, and in private owned companies, it's up to the owner who you want to pick as a managing director. But we see that there is a lot of more young females coming up in leading positions also there. And because of this, we also decided that now we have equally recruiting men and female to the defense sector and into the military. Traditionally, it's still probably more men who choose that as a career, but to start with recruiting a lot of clever females, trying to inspire them to take education into the military society, will help them also to build a lot of very, very clever officers. And I'd also like to mention that in NATO, there is in the NATO defense. I don't remember what it's called, but where you have one military leader from each country into NATO. The military leader from Norway, Louise Bastviken, she is an admiral. She is the only female military leader into the NATO. And I had the pleasure of working with her. She was in my staff when I was a Minister of Defense, and it's so good to see that such a clever person, a female, can go from working in the Defense Ministry. She's also been head of the military education in Norway, and now she's our representative to NATO as an admiral. So if you start with the young, they will eventually end up in leading positions.
You just mentioned that being the first female defense minister is not your biggest achievement.
May I ask, what do you consider your biggest achievement?
Probably achievement is a bad word. Yeah, probably in terms of achievement, that was my biggest achievement. But satisfaction, professionally, satisfaction as of a human being is much bigger. Satisfaction is when you manage to get innocent men out of the prison. There is nothing bigger than that feeling you have in a courtroom when you walk out of the courtroom together with that prisoner. There was no moment in my life which was bigger, when I felt more proud than at those moments in my previous life when I was practicing law.
I believe you continue to work on these issues in your capacity as the NGO leader.
The organization was created with a very particular purpose. As I've said, most of the reforms we started within the ministry were changed after we left, and we felt a need of continuing them at least on the societal level as much as it was possible, obviously. Of course, we could not bring minorities to the army or women to the army, but we could encourage them to be part of it. But so what we basically do is, again, on a societal level, as much as you can have an influence on the public opinion, to do all necessary work for raising resilience of the Georgian society, for creating or supporting creation of a Georgian one united civic nation, regardless of belongings to religious or ethnic backgrounds, for supporting the dialogue on big issues in a society and reaching agreement on the big issues. For example, we can kill each other daily on particular policy, domestic policy directions. I don't know what kind of vaccine we should be using or what kind of lockdown we should have during the pandemics. But when it comes to national security issues, any political party in this country, particularly the ones who are in parliament and who are in charge of decision making, should have a full-scale consensus without any buts and in case and well, under the circumstances and this kind of continuation. So we have a very clear agenda. We fight the concept of neutral Georgia. We fight the concept of Eurasian Union in Georgia. We fight dominance of the Georgian political area by the forces who support any influence from the foreign powers towards totalitarianism, supporting one-party rule, supporting non-democratic behavior, fighting liberal democracy. These are the things that are important to us. These are the values we carry, the values, very fundamental values of a liberal democratic society, and it defines our agenda when we go on a daily basis with the work, whatever work we do, being it in education or research or anti-corruption monitoring or any direction that we carry. There are lots of groups, fortunately, in Georgia who do similar job in different directions. There are lots of media players who are interested in bringing this message to the wider public. I believe that together with all the players around, being it political parties or media outlets or just average Georgians, average citizens who voluntarily take a lead on various issues related to anti-occupation movement or fighting foreign influence operations. At the end of the day, we can build a resilient society that is capable of defeating all those threats and, well, first of all, identifying all those threats and then defeating those threats for the benefit of the sovereignty of this country.
Are there any specific projects, past, current, or future projects which you are especially proud of?
Right now, what we are doing is that because there are lots of organizations doing a brilliant job on the agenda that I've just described, but related to Russia, we have decided to do a similar job, but not to intervene in the area, which is well researched and very well structured. And we took an initiative on working with other players, with other foreign actors who influence or try to influence Georgian politics, Georgian societal culture, and culture of democracy in this country. Those being China, Iran, Turkey, any other country that might fall under the radar of any of those issues. So I think that the research that we've been doing for these last 3 years, particularly on China and the Chinese state companies operating in Georgia, the corrupt deals they are involved with, my government representatives or my government representatives involved in corrupt deals with those Chinese companies, is a completely new concept in the Georgian public discourse, and regardless of a resistance from the beginning and less interest to it, after 3 years of our work, it's changed completely, and there is a huge interest. There are lots of organizations now who come for the advice, for consulting purposes to us, and also media is very much engaged and interested. The other initiative that we've started 2 years ago, right before the pandemic, actually, people were joking that we were we've predicted the online education, was that we've established an online democracy education platform, for the first one in Georgian reality. And now it's working pretty well. We have over 67 different programs run on the platform. including on Azeri and Armenian languages as well. And hopefully we will continue it, and there will be much more interaction, much more interest, and also much more courses added on a wider understanding of democracy, and not limited to only human rights or democratic institution building, like involving security and involving the human security issues as well, like healthcare and so on and so forth. So we have big plans towards this platform as well, and with the support that we get from the donors, hopefully it will be much more successful than it is right now.
I see. My last question. Your comments on current political situation would be very welcome. Will you still stick with your NGO, or would you consider more active political life?
I cannot imagine a situation when I will go back to politics. At least at this stage, it's completely unimaginable for me. I've done it a lot, and I've devoted too much of my life to it, and I think I consider that the best quality I have is that I know when to end something and start a new chapter, and that's what I did in 2016. I had a feeling after I resigned from the Ministry of Defense that there is no job that is better in public service than being Minister of Defense. There is nothing that attracts me, that interests me anymore in public service, because I think I've served the best job ever in public service. As for the current political situation, I think now it's on its lowest than it has ever been. Not because the situation is worse than ever, we've been through much worse situations, but the political life itself is the worst and at the lowest point as it ever been, because we do not have political life anymore. Even in the hardest times in Georgia, the opposition political parties were extremely active, and there were lots of situations when the political life was taken from the parliament on the streets. And streets, I don't mean demonstrations necessarily, but outside parliament political life was taking over, and people were more attracted to it and more involved and more optimistic. Now it's kind of gone. This whole boycott one-step process, when you don't really see that anybody has a plan B, plan C, next step, follow up, carry on, move on. None of this is there. It is creating a lot of skepticism, and I think that there is not much time left for the opposition to get their voters back. I think that the majority, big majority of the collective opposition voters, regardless of the parties they voted for, are wandering around looking for the political force to stick with. And this is the moment when we critically need strong leadership. Will it come? Will it happen? I don't know. I don't see real potential for it, but well, at the same time, we continue life here, so we need to stay optimistic, because otherwise none of this makes any sense.
We have learned from Tina KHIDASHELI about her Civic Idea organization. Would you like to tell us about your organization, the Norwegian Travel Association? Tourism and travel are very important for Georgia too. So how did you become involved, and what does your organization do?
I'm now working as the managing director of the Norwegian Travel Association. We organize all hotels, all restaurants, all campsites, a lot of concerts and arrangements that are all over the country. And it's a lot of small and medium businesses. But it's the third biggest business sector in Norway. And because Norway has a lot of mountains and fjords, we have quite an interest from tourists to come and to visit our country. And in many ways, there is a link between the military and the tourist sector, because one of Norway's positions in NATO has been to be the training area for a lot of foreign forces, and we have had big exercises, etc., in our ground. And I think that the fact that we have difficult climate and difficult mountains and difficult terrain, and which makes very good training conditions for the military, it's some of the same that makes us interesting as a tourist sector. So I'm joking with that I come from a sector with a lot of green tents, and now I work in a sector with a lot of red and blue tents, but we're still visiting the same mountains and the same fjords, and we're staying outside and having fun. So there is a kind of link, and I think that the pride in Norway, what in Norway are we really proud of? That is our mountains, our fjords, and our nature. And I think that also might be a similarity with Georgia. I haven't visited your beautiful countries, but I've seen a lot of movies and films and photos, and it looks like Georgia has some of the same beautiful nature, nice people, and a strong history that goes way back. So I'd like to say to Tina, it was inspiring for me to see that you, from Georgia, has been the female defense minister, and that we can continue working for the civil society after that, but still taking care of and care about the military sector and defense sector of our country. And I hope we can meet sometimes. I would like to come to Georgia, and I wish you all the best, and thank you again for interviewing me. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We cover what matters. Caucasian Journal.